Today, I just kind of wanted to do a fun brainstorm for American soccer and the structure of American soccer. Professionally, American soccer is just really disjointed and kind of messed up, so I wanted to go over this. This video is going to be pretty long and it's going to be pretty unedited, very unlike a lot of my other videos, but just bear with me. It's going to be a pretty long form video, and you're probably going to hear me say and cough a lot. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, as I said, the United States has an infamously bad professional soccer league structure. This is because of a bunch of deeply ingrained structural systems that American soccer is held up by, which are found pretty much nowhere else in the world. American sports in general are set up completely different from most other countries with how the teams and the leagues function. American sports operate as franchises where teams are propped up inorganically and really suddenly in a city. A single ownership group can buy into the league and are granted the rights to operate a team under the supervision of the league. This is in contrast to the more like club-based system common in other countries where teams often grow organically within a community. This allows the community to like own the team as a collective and support it from the amateur levels all the way up to like the top flights of world soccer, as you see in a bunch of different countries. This this small detail is pretty detrimental on the American professional soccer pyramid because it pretty much creates individual levels that are completely disconnected and almost never interact with each other. So this takes away the risk of teams from being relegated to lower leagues. Ownership groups love it because it means that no matter how little investment they put into a team that they bought into, they pretty much never have to worry about their team being pushed down to a lower tier with worse financial benefits. So the system, in a way, promotes owners to be cheap and lazy, sort of, when it comes to making a competitive club because it's not necessarily economically viable, and doing so lacks any real punishments that it would in other leagues, such as England, for example, where if you get demoted from the Premier League because you suck butt, you're going to get put down to the Championships League. So that's just a really important fact that really holds American soccer behind. But if we're going to talk about MLS specifically, MLS operates as a commissioner system where the league as a whole actually owns every team in the league. This single entity system, where the league itself owns all of the teams, means that investors buy shares in the league through buying like quote unquote ownership of a club rather than actually owning individual clubs outright. It's kind of ironic because the libertarian country of America, where we're all against socialism, we actually have some of the most socialist, idealistic leagues, sports leagues in the world. MLS operates just like the NFL, where the league owns every team. It's not owned, the teams are owned individually by a specific ownership group or owners. So, just an interesting fact that a lot of people don't really realize is that foreign leagues like the Premier League, like Serie A, all those leagues, they're actually way more free market than American leagues usually. But where was I? And so, uh, basically, the investors they own shares in teams, but they don't own them outright. And the league shares the revenues and holds the player contracts instead of players contracting with the individual teams because it's kind of an effort to control costs and ensure that the whole league stays above water. Because at the end of the day, MLS is a very new league still, and you might have a couple teams that are doing incredibly, but then have half your league not necessarily making money. And if you were to have the more traditional system where every club is its own company, you're going to have half the league fold within a couple seasons, which is not exactly ideal when you think about it. But so this means that ownership groups can make decisions with the club that they buy into, such as staff and just general business decisions, but they don't have the power to do something like move the team out of MLS. This centralized control helps maintain competitive balance within the league, but it limits the autonomy of individual clubs in making decisions. So the commissioner system in Major League Soccer leads to some structural differences that ultimately harms the American soccer pyramid. Rather than looking out for the national professional league structure as a whole, MLS looks out for itself first and foremost, which, fair enough. Thus, rather than allowing something that would make American professional soccer a bigger player on the national stage, like implementing pro rel, MLS will totally deny these attempts to help keep MLS teams that they own in MLS in the top flight. This is because MLS is by far the biggest and most profitable soccer league in the country right now. So, from a business perspective, if MLS were to allow promotion relegation to occur, this would lead to the possibility of MLS teams that they own to be relegated to lower, less financially viable leagues. These teams would then be pushed to leagues where, there's lower resources, worse attendances, worse TV deals, all that. So the commissioner centralized system that MLS operates under is a huge factor in preventing pro rel from being implemented at the top flight of American soccer, and thus kind of dampening the investments and overall competition that we potentially could see in American soccer clubs. Another really big hit to the professional American soccer pyramid that actually affects the bottom side of the American soccer pyramid is the huge emphasis on college athletics, which is pretty much found nowhere else in the world to the degree that it is in America. The US places an extremely significant emphasis on collegiate athletics as a feeder system for professional sports. College sports are highly popular and serve as primary development pathways for professional leagues. This essentially means that academies and amateur clubs are sort of forced to compete with these extremely well financially backed college athletic programs. And so this clash of interest from the amateur side of American soccer and the collegiate side causes a bit of a jumbled and inefficient system to develop high talented players that eventually can be integrated into the American soccer pyramid and become some of the best soccer players in the world. So the American soccer pyramid as a whole has deeply ingrained issues that are going to be solved no time soon. However, I can dream. And so today I kind of wanted to conduct a thought experiment where I would use my omnipotent powers to completely overhaul the American soccer system as a whole. Despite these changes being realistically impossible, I'm going to create the American professional soccer system that I wish we had going, from the organization of local amateur level clubs all the way up to the top flight of the sport in the country. Okay, so before we start changing anything, I think we should sort of familiarize ourselves a little bit more with the system and how it's currently set up. And so this graphic right here, I forget who made it. I found it on like Reddit, but it's actually a pretty good visualization of the soccer pyramid. You see with men's outdoor, you have MLS, and then you have USL Championship, and then you have USL League One, NISA. I think this might be a little outdated because MLS Next Pro is also in this Division 3. And then after that, you have all the amateur level leagues, which there are just so many of. These four, I think these are kind of more of the national level amateur leagues, but beyond that, you just have an ungodly amount of local amateur level clubs or leagues all across the country. And you can kind of see the same thing going on with indoor and the women's side as well. But anyway, so we're going to start looking at Division 1. Started at the top, we have America's one Division 1 league, Major League Soccer. Sorry, I had a burp. MLS was founded in 1993 with the first season taking place in 96 as a way to get the 1994 World Cup bid. After nearly 3 decades of expansion, MLS has teams all across the United States and Canada. It is split into a two-conference system with a Western and Eastern Conference, both of which have an equal number of teams, 15, once San Diego joins the league next year. And the top teams from both conferences compete in a playoff system at the end of the year, and in the MLS Cup, the last Western and Eastern Conference team compete to see who is going to be crowned winner of the MLS Cup that year. Then below that, we have the only Division II league in the country, the USL Championship. The USL Championship started in 2010 as a league for teams that didn't have the market sizes for MLS, but still wanted a consistent and solid league to call home. It's also divided into the same Western-Eastern Conference system that MLS has, each containing 12 teams. And they implement an end-of-season playoff where the teams that beat out the other teams in the Eastern and Western Conference battle it out to see who is crowned winner that year similarly to MLS. And then Division 3 is where it gets a little bit messy because there are three different leagues. And so this is the map I have of all of these teams put together. And as you can see, it's a little hard to look at. So we're going to go through each league individually really quick. So NISA is a national, it's the National Independent Soccer Association. They began playing in 2019. It functions under an Eastern-Western Conference system. As you can see, the West is pretty much just Phoenix and then some California teams, and then the East is kind of all over the Eastern coast. Um, it's of the three Division Three leagues, it's kind of the weakest, truthfully. USL, League One, and MLS Next Pro both just have strong upper league backing and have already absorbed multiple NISA clubs, actually. So in the real world, it's going to be interesting to see how NISA fares with competition and a lack of large upper level organization backings. But regardless, they are a currently active league that is a part of the Division Three American soccer system. And then we got USL League One. So this is just the USL Third Division League. It's got 12 teams. They have a single table setup, which is I think the first that we've seen like that actually so far that we've talked about. And yeah, it was also established 2019, so fairly new, but just has a bit more credibility because it's a part of the USL system, which has definitely cemented itself as being a bit more of a solid structure compared to a lot of other leagues that have crumbled within like a year or two. And then, of course, we have MLS Next Pro, which is sort of like the feeder league, um, or just the league for secondary teams for all of the MLS teams. It's the biggest of the three Division Three. It's got 29 teams total, two conferences established 2022, so it's very new. But I don't really expect this to go anywhere anytime soon because of its backings with MLS. There are a couple teams that are their own individual organizations, such as Carolina Core, but they somehow snuck into MLS Next Pro. I don't fully know how, but that's just something really interesting, I think. And then there are a bunch of teams that aren't just the main team plus a two, like such as North Texas, that's Dallas's secondary team. Tacoma Defiance, that's Seattle's. So they just take on different names. It's a pretty cool system. Yeah. And then the amateur division. So as I talked about earlier, it is unbelievably convoluted and jumbled. There's a ton of regional, local, and national amateur leagues, and the whole system is pretty uncentralized. There's two national leagues that are sanctioned by USASA, NISA Nations, which has 21 clubs, and the National Premier Soccer League, which has 92. Despite not being sanctioned, there are a couple other national amateur leagues, such as USL League Two, which has 128 clubs, and the United Premier Soccer League with over 400 teams. But ultimately, there's just so many amateur level clubs that kind of just go in and out throughout the years that I don't really want to talk about this in my brainstorm because it's just going to be way too much. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started with my own vision of what I think our system could look like after I take a drink. So to start with the collegiate level, first, I'm not going to get rid of the college soccer level, even though the collegiate level is sort of irrelevant in America. Title IX, which originally was conceived to protect people from gender discrimination in the college scholarship world, uh, it has like an unfortunate and totally unintended effect of reducing opportunities for male athletes to compete in their sports at the collegiate level. Title IX does not state that an equal number of men and women scholarships have to be given out, nor does it say that the amount of money for the two genders has to be equal, but it does require that the scholarships be proportionate. So let's say if half the student body is women, then half the athletic scholarships have to be given out to women. If 90% of the student body was men, 90% of the athletic scholarships had to be given out to men, that kind of thing. And so with American football, specifically college American football being such an insane phenomena, it's such a like cult practice of our country. This obviously takes up a bunch of scholarship money for college athletics. And so, also with American football being all men, this means that for a bunch of schools, for men and women scholarships to be proportionate to the school's population, this often leads to just cutting funds for less popular men's sports or just not having those sports. And so, for major college sports conferences like the SEC and the Big 12, they don't have men's soccer. So the college world does not really care or focus too heavily on men's soccer, and it kind of just leads to the top soccer prospects from not following this path. However, the mythos of college sports is really fun and so like uniquely American that I feel like cutting soccer out of it completely in my hypothetical world would be doing the sport an injustice and would be me kind of trying to separate soccer from the American way of sports a bit too much because college sports is such a huge part of our culture. And so to just like leave behind the history of college titans like SLU, Indiana, and Virginia would just kind of feel weird and an attempt at forgetting the sport and where it came from in this country. And so I'd say the one thing that I would change is I would make every college conference have men's soccer. I don't know if we gotta like say in Title IX that there has to be college soccer. I don't know how we're gonna do this, if we need to go to the legislation or what, but it's gonna be done. And so, we're gonna see conferences like SEC schools have competitive men's teams. Because at the end of the day, like I go to an SEC school and we have a competitive men's diving team, but no men's soccer team, which is the world's most popular sport ever, which is just so funny. And at the end of the day, with SEC having some of the best athletes in the United States, and honestly in the world, it's so unfortunate that we just don't have soccer. Texas, Florida, and Georgia, they have some of the best athletes in the world, and they don't have any college soccer that supports their region to watch, which is just such a unfortunate missed opportunity, I think. And so, if we had college soccer in these states, I think we could start to see some genuine pull to get young kids into the sport with the new opportunities. But that's pretty much all I really have to say about the college side of things. I don't really think it makes much of a difference on our system, so I'm going to move on. And so we're going to move to the amateur side of things. I'm not even going to mess with the outdoor side of play at the amateur level because it's just too messy and I don't even want to have to worry about that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to talk about adding a futsal league. So, with how small, or where should I start with this? I think that right now there's no great national level futsal league in the States. And with it being such a genuinely useful tool to strengthen like your technique and ball skills, we definitely need it to be a bit more prevalent in America to help boost our tiki-taka abilities because at the end of the day, America has some pretty rough foot skills. That's not really what we're known for, and I have a feeling it's never going to be what we're known for. That's just not really our style of play. Italy has like great defense. Germany has an incredible fast like counterattack, long ball play. Every country has a different style of play. Brazil has their incredible foot skills, their incredible tiki-taka abilities, and America is never going to be that, and that's okay. But we definitely do lack a lot of skills that other countries pay a lot of attention to, and I think it would really help and be beneficial to have a futsal system that was much more prevalent in the off season to actually make people realize, oh, it actually is cool to have insane soccer skills. Because when I go out to play at the fields, I play with a lot of international students who are from Africa, Europe, Asia, and they have some of the most insane dribbling abilities I've ever seen. But the way we play is just so different. And all the American guys, we're doing all these good passes, we're playing really well as a team, but we just can't we can't even come close to their dribbling abilities, and they just smoke us. And so I think it's just something interesting that could be brought up. So with how small of an operation that futsal is, I think it's going to be smart to have it more with like regional local leagues. So less money spent on travel, with futsal being pretty much just hard floor gyms. There would be plenty of infrastructure already in place to hold the league because, we got basketball courts everywhere and whatnot. And so there would be no upfront cost to start a national level futsal league because there would have to be no stadiums and whatnot built. It would also be really important because at the end of the day, a lot of America has horrible weather for like half the year. And so if we could have a system where we could play soccer and continue to get better indoors instead of just playing another sport for a good 5, 6 months, that would totally help start building more great soccer athletes in America. And so I think the top 64 metros in the United States should have a local futsal league or leagues within the city. And I think these leagues, depending on the size of the city, can vary in the number of teams depending on the interest. And I think the season will run from roughly the beginning of October and end in around early February with about a game a week, which comes out to around 18 regular season games. And this also fills that void between the outdoor season, so there would be at some level of soccer in America being played at all times, which would be really cool. So 64 metro leagues, and then I think the top team from every metro should earn their way into a postseason national playoff to try and win what I want to call the Tozer Cup. And so here you can see the different regions. I'm going to make 4 regions. All of these are just local leagues that are going to be kind of sifted into their general mega region conference at the end of the year. And so the Tozer Cup, which is named after Keith Tozer, the historic coach for the U.S. men's national futsal team, he won the CONCACAF Futsal Championship, got the U.S. to third in the Futsal World Cup, and then he became the commissioner of the Major Arena Soccer League. So he has a huge impact on the indoor and futsal American world. So I think it'd be really cool to have a trophy named after him, and it would kind of help start building a little bit of that culture around soccer and more of the, I don't know what you want to call it, the mythos, I suppose, of great names in our sport here. And so, talking about this, I don't know what you want to call it, mega conference, I suppose, this mega playoff at the end of the year. A bunch of people are probably going to point out there's a bunch of different metro regions with different populations. So, for example, I don't know, what city do I want to make fun of? We'll be nice. We'll be like Glendale, Arizona. Probably doesn't have a similar interest in soccer to the level of Chicago, Illinois. But at the end of the day, this is just an amateur level futsal league that I don't really think matters at all. And so I don't really care if it's really all that unfair in the final playoff. I just want to have futsal being played at some level throughout the country. And so, uh, in the Colonial Conference right here, the Eastern Board, we've got around 85 million people in this region. The Golf League has around 83. Corn Belt has around 86, and the whole Western Frontier region has around 78 million. So population-wise, these regions are actually divvied up pretty well. And so the national 64 team tournament is going to be sort of a March Madness style tournament, as you saw, where the top team from every local metro league is going to have a spot into the playoff. And then from there, we're going to keep playing on until there's one left in the Frontier region, one left in the Gulf region, the Colonial Conference, and the Corn Belt Commonwealth, and then they're going to play each other, and we'll have an end of year final futsal winner, which I think would be a really cool system and just be a sort of fun trophy similar to the Open Cup. And with the recent, I don't know if you want to call them attacks on the US Open Cup by MLS, it'd be cool to have other national level tournaments that we do every year that can hopefully stay afloat and stay alive to continue building American soccer heritage. But regardless, that's pretty much all I really have about the American or the amateur level of American soccer. I don't think it really needs to feed into the professional side at all, so I'm not even going to do that. This is going to be its own separate level of the pyramid. And so, if we want to actually start talking about the continual pyramid where every level is attached to each other, we're going to start now at the third division in the community league. So right now, third division professional soccer in America is divided between 3 different leagues, the MLS Next Pro, NISA, and USL One, as I talked about earlier. I'm going to keep all the teams from these respective leagues alive, and I'm just gonna mush them all into one mega league, which I'm going to call the Community League. but I am going to separate them up into conferences based on geography. And so I'm going to be cutting up the existing leagues just a little bit. So between the three current leagues, there's 52 teams total, which it works out perfectly for a four-conference system, with each holding about 13 teams. We are going to have four different conferences: the Pacific Conference, the Mountain Prairie Conference, the Northeast Conference, and the Southeast Conference, each holding 13 teams from each of the current three Division III leagues, amounting to 52 teams. Each team is going to play every other team in their conference, home and away, and then they're also going to do 6 out-of-conference games, totaling to 30 games total. Once the season is done, the top team in each conference is automatically promoted to the next division up, the Challengers League. This is, by the way, this is a map of it. If you just want to look at the different regions, get an idea of where your team or your city might be. And so the top team in each conference gets an immediate promotion up to the Challenger League. The Challengers League is the new Division II league that I'm going to be creating. By the way, these are all the teams that are in each related conference. If you just want to pause on that, look at what teams are where. But once the top team from each conference is promoted, they're put into the Challengers League. The Challengers League is the new Division II league for American soccer, each team making up, or each conference making up 6 teams, with 4 conferences equaling to 24 teams total. Right now, the teams that are in the Challengers League are just the USL Championships League teams. I think I stole this map online, so if any of the things are not in the right spot, don't blame me. But these are the teams that are going to be starting in the Challengers League. So we've got the Golden Frontier Conference, which is just kind of the Western. We have the Heartland Conference, which is just the Midwest, Texas, kind of the West as well, with Colorado and New Mexico. And then we have the Liberty League, which is the Northeast and most of the Great Lakes. And then the Dixie Crown, which is just the greater Southeast Asia area. And so conferences in the Community League and the Challenger League are correlated. So for example, the Golden Frontier Conference from the Challenger League and the Pacific Conference from the Community League have pretty much the exact same geography. So every season, the best team from the Pacific Conference and the Community League is pushed up to the Golden Frontier Conference and the Challenger League, and vice versa. This ensures that the geography of conferences doesn't get too mixed up from our promotion relegation system. And this is obviously very important because while for most countries they have an effective pro-rel system, the geography and how far the teams are from each other is not a serious concern. Most of these countries, are in Europe, where the countries are much smaller geographically. And so you could be on the very top of Germany and play a team on the very south of Germany, and that's not much of a far drive at all. However, if you were to play a team in western the United States versus eastern United States, you have to travel by plane because there is no way you're making that bus ride before a soccer game. So geography is obviously a huge limiting factor here with our pro rail system in America, and that's something that I think my conference system kind of combats a little bit, because at the end of the day, instead of possibly having to play a new team from a league on the other side of the world for like a Division III soccer league, or other side of the country, you will, at the end of the day, hopefully just have to play teams within your greater conference area, which can still be a very large area for sure with, Texas to Minnesota, but it's much smaller than the possibility of having to travel across all of the entire United States. And then I don't really want to talk about this too much because I don't want to get too much into the specifics, by the way. I didn't talk about this for the community league, but I want to have stadium capacity minimums for all the teams. So I did 5,000 for the community league just to have, some kind of respectable facility. It's not just a pitch and then bleachers around the outside. 5,000 isn't a lot at all. I don't think it's insane to expect this, especially if in this hypothetical world that I'm doing, America is maybe a bit more soccer crazed, and so there's going to be a lot more support. And then for the Challengers League, it's only a bump of 3,000, so it's really not that much more. And I think a minimum stadium capacity of 8,000 for a second division league in the richest country in the world for a sports league isn't an insane thing to ask. So there's that. And then this, of course, brings us to the first division, the Continental League. So the top division of American soccer is the Continental League, and it contains the current MLS teams. As of this video, there's 30 confirmed MLS teams, but I'm going to expand it to 32 so that we can easily divide the league into four divisions and continue our conference system, our four conference system. I'm going to make the minimum stadium capacity an ambitious 20,000 because at the end of the day, this is the top level, and this is going to require some current MLS teams to have to upgrade even, but at the end of the day, I think at this point, those teams have to upgrade anyway, so I don't think this is an insane thing to ask. But anyway, the two teams that I'm going to be adding are in New Orleans, which is Voodoo United. Voodoo United is going to be a new top flight team propped up in New Orleans. It's inspired by the prominence of voodoo culture within the city, and it's kind of just a fun name that represents a part of the city's culture. It's also already kind of a team, or at least was, I think, an indoor arena soccer or indoor arena football team was called the New Orleans Voodoo, and I totally jacked their logo. That's what the skull with the hat on is in the middle. I did not actually draw that. I kind of just stole it from their logo and then built from there. And so I think it's just a fun, sort of Americanized branding of a team. You know, it's not United, I guess, is sort of a European thing to tie the team more to the city. However, with sort of like a mascot of voodoo and then that little skull dude, it feels very American, is what I'm trying to say. But I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, especially because the next team that I'm doing, the Baltimore Brigade, I kind of went the complete opposite direction and did very more of like that European crest vibe, I suppose. Baltimore, the new team is going to be called the Baltimore Brigade. It ties the team really close to the port city culture that Baltimore has had throughout their years. A large part of Baltimore's culture has been affected by the harbor and the economic impacts that it has had with the city and the people. The U.S. Navy also has a really long history within the city, so there's a deep connection to the Navy. In the 1800s, the British, I think, once called the city a den full of pirates and privateers, which is just like another fun tie-in to the name of the club. And I think like the almost skull and bones look that the silhouette of the crest takes on kind of gives homage to that little trash talking that Britain did against our beautiful people of Baltimore and calling them just pirates. I also included the iconic Maryland flag because it's such a cool flag and it's so unique and it's so Maryland. And I think that the people of Baltimore take a lot of pride in it, and I think it just makes sense to have that on their crest. So, moving on from here, these are all the teams that are in it, right? With all the current MLS teams, San Diego, which will start playing next year, and then Baltimore and New Orleans. We're going to have four conferences. I decided that for the top level, they're just going to be very professional sounding conference names. It's just going to be the Western, Central, Southeast, and Northeast Conference, each holding 8 teams. I think each team is going to play away and home against the 7 other teams in our conference, as well as 16 out-of-conference games, which takes us to 30 games total in the season, which isn't ridiculous at all. At the end of the 30 game season, the team that is at the very bottom of their conference is booted down to the Challengers League, and then the top 2 teams in each conference are given a spot into the top flight playoff series to determine the best team in the entire country that season. This is just another look at the league and the different conferences. It's a bit cleaned up, as you can see, with each conference being labeled with the colors. But as I said, there was going to be a playoff at the end of the year. The top 2 teams from each conference get into the tournament, and this is the only league that actually does a tournament in American soccer in my system, with the other ones just doing regular season, just like most other like European leagues do. However, I didn't want to just completely get rid of any version of any like playoffs or tournament systems from American soccer because that's a very American thing to do. And at the end of the day, American soccer is a blend. It doesn't have to just be exactly like European soccer, but it has to be a blend of our beautiful American traditions and the traditions that the rest of the world follow. But anyway, the Continental Playoffs bracket is going to be just done like this. Top two teams. So the first seed and second seed, first seed teams always play at home. And so you're going to have like the Western first seed play the Central second seed, for example. And then let's say that the Western first seed and the Central first seed win. Then they play each other. Well, they're both first seeds. Who plays at home? That's going to just be decided by whoever has the better regular season record. Like, had they been in the same conference, whoever would have been higher is going to play at home. So it's pretty simple. I'm not going to make it too more confusing than that. I don't want to mess it up at all. They're going to be all single game, single elimination games. So it will be a really quick, sweet, and short tournament, which is good because the current MLS tournament is just a little convoluted and kind of just drags on, honestly, which I don't really like personally. But yeah, that's how that's going to work. Um, Talking about this whole system, I know that it's not perfect at all, and mainly this is honestly because of geographic reasons. One of the issues with American soccer is just the insane geography of our country, with most soccer crazed countries having the highest level leagues in the world, like Spain, England, Germany, Germany, or Italy. They all are pretty much as large as some American states, and so this means that teams have to travel very short distances to play, and thus it just logistically makes a lot of financial sense, even for lower leagues, because the cost of travel is so low. However, with US being the third or fourth largest country in the world, travel distances are a little bit higher. And then that paired with our piss poor public transportation, we have some of the most expensive traveling in the world. And thus, if we wanted to make lower level leagues make sense logistically and not lose a bunch of money from the cost of travel alone, I decided that we would have to implement that division system that I've been talking about. And so this allows for teams, for the most part, to only have to play other teams that are within a reasonable distance. The system makes it a bit more possible for the lower level leagues to pay reasonable amounts of money for travel, given the amount of profits that they'll realistically get. But that system does lead to a bit of complications, I guess. So with pro rel teams of different geographies are in specific regional conferences associated with partner regional conferences in the leagues above and below them. And so for the most part, this means that the clubs are within pretty much the same area. However, there are a couple of times where it's possible for some goofy looking oddities. And so, for example, this is the geography of Baltimore Brigade, which is pretty far north despite being placed in the Southeast Conference. So let's say they're relegated to the Challengers Cup or League, the second division league. This would make them further north than to a couple of the teams in the Liberty League, and it just kind of it definitely feels weird and it's not perfect. They don't geographically make the most sense here. Technically, I mean, it realistically should probably be Louisville that is the other team in the Southeast, but that's just not how the conferences are set up. And so it doesn't look great. It looks a little goofy, but at the end of the day, I don't really care. So that's just how it's going to work. I know that, Loudoun United and Baltimore are within 70 miles of each other, but aren't in the same conference. That's just going to happen sometimes, especially in areas that are very dense that have a bunch of teams. So, and then another oddity, there's a huge overlap between the Northeast and Southeast Conference within the first division. So, let's say that the Carolina Core, it's a third division team. Let's say they were to be promoted all the way up to the Continental League. They would be geographically sort of like in the central part of the Southeast Conference, despite being in the Northeast Conference. And this is once again just how the conferences are set up. It's a little janky, but I still think it's probably one of the best ways for a system like this to be set up. So I'm not going to mess with it. I think it's funny, honestly. I just want to leave it. Last oddity we're going to look at is Huntsville, Alabama. So Huntsville City FC, Huntsville, Alabama, like that's south. When you think of Alabama, you don't necessarily think of the Midwest or anything like that. You're thinking of the Southeast probably. However, because of how the teams are set up, if they were to be promoted all the way up to the top division in the Continental League, they would just be in the Central League. It would be a little goofy. They'd be a little bit too far south, a little bit too far east, but that's just how it's going to be. And I think it's kind of funny. But despite there being some like weird aspects of this league for sure, I think there are a lot of really cool, fun possibilities that it brings up that just aren't really in place currently in our actual system. So, for example, we're going to look at the Central Conference. So, Texas actually has enough teams to theoretically have a team fill up or have every single team in the first division Central Conference in the Continental League be in Texas. So Austin, Dallas, and Houston's secondary teams would all have to be promoted up, and then San Antonio and El Paso would too. But theoretically, we could see every single Central Conference team be from Texas, which is a very funny possibility that I think is really goofy. And then next we have the same thing with California, which makes a bit more sense, honestly. The Western Conference throughout all levels of play have 27 teams, and 16 of those teams are in the state of California. So let's say that if all the California Division One Conference League teams were to stay in the league, and then all of the Challenger League's Cali teams were to be promoted to the Continental League, we could see a Western Conference made up of all California teams. But it's hilarious because that's not even where it ends. With there being 8 more California teams outside of these teams on the screen, if they were to also be promoted to the Challengers League, then we could theoretically see a Western Conference in the Continental League with all California teams and a Golden Frontier Conference in the Challengers League also with all California teams. So there would be a Division 1 and Division 2 associate conferences that were entirely made of teams from the exact same state, which is hilarious, and I think it just goes to show how much California loves soccer and how big of a titan they are in the American soccer world. Obviously, it's easy to hate on California. It's easy to hate on the LAFC people. I get it. I'm not immune to it whatsoever. But they do really help push the sport forward for our country as a whole. And they just have some of the greatest fans in the country and some of the most fans in the country. There's a reason that California is so dense with soccer teams compared to anywhere else in the country. But next, I'm just gonna go ahead and look at a bunch of more specific regions just so we can get a closer look and get an idea of what teams are going to be where and maybe some of the possible derbies. So this is the Pacific Northwest, which obviously has a lot of soccer culture. And you can see there's Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, and then there's also Spokane, Washington. And so I think there could be some really cool stuff going on here. And then we got the Southwest teams. Obviously, the Southwest is a huge region, and it has a very strong Hispanic populations who just, historically love soccer. And so there's a lot of possibilities for some really cool derbies and some really cool rivalries to kind of pop up in this region, and I'd be really interested to see how this would come about. And then next, we just have all the California teams. I just kind of wanted to show them off. It was extremely hard to make this map because there's so many teams, and it's really hard to fit all these logos in such a small area. Um, they have the most number of teams out of any state in the country with 16, and 8 of them are within the LA area alone, which is insane. And I think this map just shows off a really interesting possibility of teams competing to be the best in North Cal or South Cal. And then, of course, the North Cal versus South Cal competition would be on full blast with all of these teams competing against each other to prove which side of the state is better. California will always be a soccer powerhouse in America because of its size and its soccer loving populations, and so this is a really cool region to just take a really cool deep dive into. And the next we have the Midwest slash Great Lakes teams. I think there could be some really interesting rivalries in this area that don't currently exist, with a bunch of already in place state rivalries between a lot of these places, such as Minnesota, Wisconsin, or literally any of the other Great Lakes states versus each other. I think now giving them an ability to actually play each other and compete in soccer, we could see some real insane competitions arrive. And then, of course, the Detroit Derby would be really interesting to see which of these 3 teams fight to become the best in the city. And I was honestly really surprised when I found out that there were three completely separate, unaffiliated soccer organizations in the greater Detroit region. I think that's just really cool and shows a bit of Detroit soccer culture, which I think a lot of times probably goes a little bit unseen. Pennsylvania, obviously the Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia rivalry is deep, and so I think this could be a really cool competition that we could see. And then with Pennsylvania just being one of the, great hotspots of American soccer history, to have sort of a resurgence of soccer with these rivalries could be huge for the sport. Florida is another large state that has a good number of teams from cities that all have previous sports rivalries, which I think would allow for some great new rivalries to pop up. They also have a very large Hispanic population too, as they're far south. And so we can definitely see a lot of huge soccer fans supporting their local clubs and just allowing for a lot of fun competitions. And then this is honestly one of the more surprising regions, in my opinion. So the Southeast as a whole actually has some of the highest density of soccer teams anywhere in the country, thanks to a thriving D3 presence. There's so many cool matchups and rivalries here that can come about, and I just love it. I don't think the Southeast is really thought of as a soccer loving region just because it's usually dominated by college football and stuff like that. But if you just look at like Atlanta United's success, right, as the original like Southeast team, you quickly realize that there are a ton of people in this region that love the sport, and they're just not really given the time of day or given the teams to represent to show off their love of the sport. And so I think there's a lot of room for growth currently in this region of the country for soccer, and I'm really excited to see if we implemented a system like this, how this region would, adopt the sport and possibly push it forward in our country. And then Tennessee. So Tennessee is really cool because, I mean, as you can see, there's five separate teams with two pretty medium-sized markets, Memphis and Nashville. That'll be a fun, little statewide derby between two of the big markets. But then one of the more interesting things, in my opinion, was that Chattanooga, Tennessee has two soccer teams. We could see a Chattanooga derby in America. Like that would be so cool to see Chattanooga FC versus the Chattanooga Red Wolves. Like that would be such a fun, exciting local Southeast derby to watch. I would love to see stuff like this rise in our country a bit more. And I think it's possible that in the future we might get to see a bit more stuff like this. North Carolina, it's another state with good amount of teams, three of which are in the Charlotte area. Um, that three-state derby could lead to some fun theatrics and a pretty cool underdog story, I think, for the Charlotte Independents to possibly take over the city one day. We also have, Carolina Core and North Carolina FC, which represent, smaller markets that could develop a really cool North Carolina rivalry, I think. And I just have to say, I love Carolina Core's logo. Like, it's so clean. I love it, dude. Then we got Georgia. I think that the South Georgia versus Atlanta competition would be really fun to watch as we see, South Georgia Tormenta and the Savannah Clovers take on their northern neighbors and possibly even take down the Atlanta dominating team, Atlanta United. And then same as Charlotte, we could see a cool underdog story with Georgia FC possibly taking over the city at one point and beating out Atlanta United, which would be a really cool thing to see. The East Coast is one of, if not the most historic region in all of America when it comes to soccer culture. Cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Boston took in hundreds of thousands of immigrants in the 19th and 20th century who all brought their European love of soccer over to the New World. And then other cities like Pittsburgh, they had huge soccer cultures that arose from the immigrant steelworkers who would play after their factory shifts. And so there's plenty of soccer hotbeds in this region, and thus the love of soccer is strong here. And I think that these rivalries between all these teams could have some real deep connected histories, and it would just be so cool to see something like this happen. So if we look a little bit closer at the general Chesapeake Bay area, we see some really cool stuff. The Chesapeake Bay was a landing point for a bunch of immigrants coming to the New World, and so it became a soccer hotbed. The strong soccer culture in the area is the cause of like the insane density of teams in the area between Virginia, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and Pennsylvania. Some really cool derbies could definitely start in this area, with some of the teams being extremely close to each other. Loudoun United, Loudoun United and the Maryland Bobcats are only 32 miles apart. The Baltimore Brigade and DC United play less than 40 miles away from each other, and the Maryland Bobcats and DC United are within 24 miles of each other. So these teams make the region probably the densest part of the country, maybe behind like LA, of course, because that's one city. But with so many teams within less than 50 miles of each other, this geography just allows the possibility of some extremely heated games between these teams fighting for dominance in the area. And I have to say, it's probably one of my more favorite spots in this whole system just because of the insanely close geographic proximity of so many different cities and peoples and identities who all just want to, play the beautiful game, dude. I just, I don't know. There's so few parts in America that have this many teams that are so close to each other, I guess. When you think of like a derby in America, you think of teams in the same state, whereas a real derby is teams that are like within the same city or just tens of miles each other. And like this is a region that actually has authentic derbies, which is so cool. And then the last local place that we're going to look at is the Texas teams. Talked about this a little bit earlier when we were like, what if they became the Central League? But this is just a bit of a cleaner map to look at it. And so, as you can see, you have a lot of Eastern Texas with Dallas, Austin, Houston, and then San Antonio too, of course. And there's a lot of teams over there, but I really like that there's also El Paso out in the West. I think that's just a cool little, like, the whole state, every state and every corner of the state has a group that they can support. And I don't know, it's fun. I like it. And of course, Texas also, they just love their sports and they have some of the most like rambunctious fans in America. So these teams have great supporters, and I think it could really lead to some crazy state derbies. But yeah, that was just kind of a discussion and a brainstorm of a hypothetical soccer system in the United States, from the amateur indoor futsal leagues made of players playing in their free time to the world-class top-flight players and teams, of which, only one could be crowned champion of the nation every year. I think that this system would allow for a bit more fluidity between the levels of competition and just increase the level of play throughout the country by, forcing clubs to compete as well as they can to not be relegated. The complete lack of pro-rel in American soccer does do like irreparable damage to the development of talent in our country, and it totally dampens the ability for grassroots born clubs to rise into the spotlight of US soccer. So, this is the biggest and almost impossible to deal with issue that is and always has plagued American soccer, but in a beautiful, perfect world where I don't have to worry about that, I got to make this really cool brainstorm system. I got to let some of I don't know what you want to call it, my specialness, my special interest out. I got to just kind of design a whole soccer system from the lowest level to the top level, and it was really fun to like actually just brainstorm how a system like this would work. And as you can see, this is the full map of every team. Insane to look at. There are so many teams that would be within the same system that all could theoretically play against each other. And I just love that. Like, that's so cool. And, this will never happen. And we'll probably never get to beat the no pro rel allegations given to us from Europeans. But that's okay. Because at the end of the day, I love our sport in America. It's fun. We do love this sport as much as it seems we don't. And I don't know. I got to make this video explaining it, but I appreciate y'all watching this. This was kind of a bit more of a ramble, honestly, with me doing a bunch of homework right now. I'm in college for mechanical engineering, and it is kind of buns, and so getting to kind of just do this in my free time or in between studying, it was really fun. I got to let some of my like creative juices out, and to be totally honest, like I could edit this down and make it like a really well-made video, but I just do not have the time or patience to do that right now. So I decided I was just going to make this into like a slideshow, put all my ideas out there and then just kind of ramble atop the slides about everything that I kind of want to see in the system. But yeah, I hope you didn't take like a drink every time I said because you're probably dead by now. But appreciate you watching. Thank you.